One of my mentors was Peter Dolan, who was the former chairman and CEO of Bristol Myers Squibb. And he was kind of my internal hero. And he gave me my advice about marketing. And he said, marketing is nothing more than common sense. If it makes sense here and here, he says, that's a winning strategy. But in figuring that out, you've got to sift your way through the 1,000 options and pick one or two that make absolutely sense to you to be able to pursue. And then you've got to marry that up with the accountability side of it so that in the end, marketing is about making decisions and making the most productive decisions, because if you do have 1,000 options, you have to decide where you want to allocate those resources. And if we have nothing to guide us, then we are going to flail and then fail.
Talk a little bit about how you've balanced your challenge to the world in terms of be better with the fact that our industry has to also be better in our business practices.
Well, you know, Joseph, this actually hit me about a little more than 20 years ago. My family, Betsy and our 3 daughters, were up in the Colorado mountains at a spiritual retreat. And the spiritual leader at the end said to me, you know, I hope you realize the good you can do, because you're in business, and business will someday be the greatest force for good in the future. If you choose to do so, you can do a lot of good. And it was like literally that blinding moment of clarity where I was like, whoa, okay, this happened for a reason.
How do you deal with the sadness? How do you deal with the bad news?
That's an excellent question. Excellent. Thank you for putting it like that, because no, it's, again, positivity does not have to be dreamer. Positivity does not mean block all the bad things and just talk about the good. Positivity is the balance. And yeah, of course we got bad news in our business. Of course we got bad news in the society. And for me, there is 2 fundamental principles. One is transparency. You don't have to hide bad news. You just have to make sure that they're communicated in a very transparent way, and they're very well explained. This is why it happens. Here's where it comes from. Then my 3rd pillar is act. So what do we do about it? We can sit here and cry for the whole rest of the quarter. That's fine. We can. How can we reinvent ourselves? How can we reinvent marketing to work with less? So act.
Which basically creates an acronym for T.
Okay, let's trademark that. Love that.
This is your quote, Frank. Whatever you do will be insignificant, but it is very important that you do it. It's Gandhi.
What I love about this quote is not so much about our sitting around trying to measure the amount of impact that we're having and trying to compare it on a relative scale. It's just do your part, and the collectively, that's how we all move forward. I think it's a great quote.
And by the way, I think you just said something so fantastic there right at the end, because oftentimes, even if we can measure it, it may seem insignificant. It may not even seem measurable. It may not seem like this is a minuscule amount, but all of these small acts, and sometimes, by the way, random acts of kindness, amount to something that can change the world.
That's exactly right.
I think the key to a good life is 3 things. The first is to be kind to yourself and to everybody around you and everything around you. You know, if there's a spider in the room, don't kill it, pick it up and take it outside, because it's not doing you any harm. The second is to be true. Be true to what you believe. Work out what truth is to you. Be true to how you believe the world should operate, and be true to others. And then the third is to be funny. And if you go through life attempting those things, you won't meet them all the time, but if you attempt them, I think you'll have a nice time.
And I think, I mean, you've scored 2 out of 3, right? You're kind, you're true, and so you're working on the 3rd one, which is
I am, especially in the time we're in. You know, take the good out of what we've got. As I said to my father-in-law at the beginning of this, is Jim, we're all going to die one day. We may as well enjoy the days that we don't.
When you define success as making a hard-to-use healthcare system easier to use, you will only fail when you stop. When you define success as does your individual program or widget work, it could fail any day. But that's not how we define success. We define success on making meaningful progress to rebuilding healthcare around people. And so that keeps us going. You know, we can try 15 different things, and if one succeeds, we're on our way.
We all talk about experimentation tactically, but this is experimentation philosophically, strategically, morally, ethically, culturally, and it all comes together to create, you know, a company that can survive and thrive.
As you said, it is to campaign for real beauty. And we looked and had a heavy heart for the amazing essential workers on the front line in the beginning of the crisis, taking care of us all. And we saw beauty in their work. In some cases, 20 hours of work a day, and the badge that they carried from the PPE that they were wearing in their mask. And we said, how can we help? And we knew there was a shortage of PPE. So we made a pledge to invest in PPE with direct relief. And in that also celebrated these healthcare workers for their courage. And we led an initiative, Courage is Beautiful, as a part of that 2 million donation.
If you're vanilla, if you just are all things to all people, you end up being nothing to nobody. So when you push, when you actually try and break boundaries, it's almost impossible not to offend someone. How do you have that confidence to be able to not just be average and mediocre and satisfactory?
For me, what you said is actually the starting point of the conversation. And it's one that I talked a lot about at Nissan and now here at Planet Fitness. It's not being vanilla. Like vanilla, it is the most popular flavor, but it's safe, but you won't drive across town for vanilla. You know, it's just not going to be what's going to drive and really kind of create that resonance and the demand of our brands. I always look to your truth. What is a North Star you're aiming for? What is the lighthouse, the beacon that you're trying to be for your members? And really being courageous on that. That's not being flippant. That's not being arrogant.
I've always been intrigued by how do you form very powerful teams. And my approach has always been about curating the team to make sure that they have very different superpowers. I try to surround myself with people who have powers that I don't have, because I believe that the most effective teams are the ones who have completing abilities versus competing abilities. That's normally where unhealthy tension comes out. You know, when you're trying to compete against each other instead of uniting and competing with the competitors outside of your team. And the rule is in the team, in the teams that I lead, we all respect each other's superpower, one. B, we seek to have formations where, depending on the brief or the objective, we have different sorts of formations, right? And the third one is no one should pretend that they have someone else's superpower.
You know, the idea of being a force for good and a force for growth, it is very important that it's both, because if you're a force for good and you're not, and you don't have any growth, it's philanthropy, which is nice and it's good. Philanthropy is good, but it's not sustainable. We have shareholders. If you're a force for growth with no good, then consumers view you as somewhat mercenary. So the trick is to make sure that whatever you are in a force for good leads to being a force for growth, because what that does is good leads to growth, leads to more good, leads to more growth, leads to more good, and becomes a sustainable cycle. And that's the lens through which we look at everything. We're not new to it, but we've now framed it and put it into more of a strategy.
The one thing I think I realized I was always after, actually, and I should have amended, a life well lived, where to me that meant doing things and being out there and participating in everything you could. And then I sort of realized during this time that it's really about a life well loved, that we really have to spend those times with the connections and the relationships. And for me, this is applied at work with all of my peers and colleagues, and of course my personal relationships. And it's changed. That perception has changed everything. I think the world will benefit from this time that we've had to slow down and reconnect again. And I think we need it.
It's not just a life well loved, but it's loving and being loved in return. I know it sounds like we're in the musical Moulin Rouge, but it's true.